It will take nothing short of 100 proof living to restore lives. Join a conversation between a cop and a criminal with Brian Yates, Chris Pridmore, and featuring Caitlin Meath, working to inspire and motivate others, rebuilding the communication breakdown. This is the 100 Proof Living Podcast.
Welcome back to Conversation with a Cop and a Criminal. I'm Brian Yates.
And I'm Caitlin Meath.
And I'm Chris Pridmore, and welcome to the show today. We're going to do another discussion like we did last time and build off of no excuses with everything that's been going on. And my update this week is going to be a little shorter than I normally do. I wrote an article this week I'd like you to take a look at on 100proofliving.com. It's called Lose Yourself. And the whole idea was I think we spend so much time finding ourselves and focusing on ourselves, we forget to do the very thing that can probably heal us the most, and that is to invest in others. And that's some of the things that we're going to talk about here in this show. The second thing is the book that I put out a while ago, The Anomaly of the Journey. One of the things that I've asked people to do when they have that, it was originally designed as a journal guide. But the point of it now is really just to write your story along with mine. I'm not saying use my book. I'm saying I think there's value in this time that we're down to write your story. If you are focused on yourself and you are trying to figure out what's going on with you, write your story down. Have it be something that you can leave as a legacy to somebody else. I feel like that we learn a lot from each other, and that is one way that you can invest in somebody else. So that came to mind. But one thing we wanted to do here to kick off is just to talk about how individually each one of us is dealing with this pandemic and how it may have changed our schedules and what we're doing to even maintain some sense of sanity, I guess. And for me, I've been fortunate because I feel like I'm very equipped to be isolated. For one is I'm an alcoholic by trade, I guess, for a while, and isolation I was a big fan of. The second thing is because some of the limitations of that season in life has had it so that my life is relatively isolated. However, it still does impact me, and it does change the circumstances that I live in, and it does for all of us. And so some of the things that I'm doing to kind of get through it is, and I've learned this through some reading, I've learned it through some leadership guides as well, but maintaining a schedule has been massively important to me. I don't know about you, but Tuesday becomes Sunday real quick, and we don't know what happened in between. For me, what's super important is that I hold to the schedule. And so some of the tactics that I've actually used, and it's just the way my mind thinks, is I actually block times on a calendar. So my day starts at 7. My work day, as a recruiter, my work day starts at 7, it ends at 5. In that day, I block times specifically for tasks that I will get done every day in those times. It's a tough discipline. I've been having a hard time sticking with it. It's easy to get distracted with phones and everything else, but it's helped me maintain some sense of day in and day out activity. The next thing is that has helped me really is that I do have a home office, which I think I have an advantage over some, is that I didn't have to set up a home office. I had a home office, but it gave me a place to work and a place to not work. So when you're in your home and you're working from home, have a place that's your workspace and have a place that's your home space. Don't let them blend together. It becomes I think it becomes a problem for your family, and it can become a problem actually when we rebuild our lives here and get back going again. And then when you are doing these self-reflection moments, and I think a lot of it has inspired people to invest in others. For me, I've found to identify spiritual barriers. And Brian and I have had conversations about some of the barriers that I'm struggling with spiritually, that the noise of life has allowed me to just walk past. And they're actually real problems that if I don't deal with them, I'm going to have a problem down the road. And so I think that my inner circle has been helpful in that way, but spiritual barriers have been a huge thing for me to take a look at. No better time than now when I got no other noise in my ear. So those are the things that I'm doing. And Brian, how are things going with you?
Pretty good. So you guys know that I worked last night, so I'm a little tired today. But it did give me an opportunity kind of, again, out on the street to see the way that this is impacting first responders. And so you talked about how your work day isn't interrupted quite as much because you work from home traditionally and this part of the routine. But of course, all the people, your vendors and the people that you interact with, they are all impacted. And so that's changing a lot for everybody. For the first responders, it's the barriers just kind of follow you around. Instead of being barricaded in your home or having to keep distance at a store, it's really everywhere that you go. So, listening to the radio traffic last night for car accidents and some other medical calls, and then, a few criminal complaints that we had to follow up on. It's really interesting because in those moments, my wife would hate to hear me say this, but in those moments, you forget all about COVID. Now, I've got a my middle console in the squad is full of masks for me. You don't grab those in those moments because you're just so used to doing things. And so I would say, again, my daughter's a nurse and she's actually deployed in New York City right now. And I just think of the way we have to go about things as first responders is so dynamically different now. And you're starting to see some of the bigger departments really come down with heavy cases of this, which then paralyzes the workforce, because now you're asking people to work, instead of their 10-hour shift, you're asking to work 12 and 14 hours to compensate for the workforce that's down. Whereas a large company will just send people home to self-isolate. First responders can't do that. So please keep them in your prayers, and just be aware that some of the things that they're facing are just compounded by, their daily job. It's kind of some of the ways that I deal with it. And Chris, I appreciate what you said for two reasons. One is this idea of a schedule. For you've created kind of a home office, and that's where you go to work. I think one of the big challenges for me is not having a place to go to, right? Especially for the gym. For me, I've always hated working out at home, because going to the gym is like an event. I have to block the time off in my schedule that day, and when I get there, I'm there with a purpose. Whereas if I'm down in the basement, I can always just walk away. I can get distracted, and it's never quite the same. Mostly because my wife won't let me play 80s rap really loud like they do at the gym. But sidebar, I do think that idea of scheduling is important. So we have to be intentional about replacing some of those things in our schedule. I know for me, the negative talk comes into my life, the negative self-talk, when I just sit around and kind of stew about something. And last week we focused a lot about kind of recognizing the circumstance, recognizing that there are options. And this week it's way more about doing something about it for yourself, but also doing something about it for other people that might need kind of that little pick-me-up, or that reminder that you got to keep walking down the path. You can't just stay here. And so, keeping that schedule, continuing to force myself to work out. And now I actually kind of block it off with a timer. Like, I'm going to go do this for 40 minutes, because if I don't, I just fall into kind of the lazy patterns from before, which is kind of my point about responding to a call on the street and not thinking about grabbing my mask, because for 20 years, I've never thought about grabbing a mask. And so there's so many of these little kind of structural changes that I think, have become really important. And it's just a reminder that we have to be really purposeful and intentional. So Caitlin, can you give us some kind of updates on what's going on in the community, and specifically how you're dealing with this?
Yeah, I'm really excited to be able to share with you all that as far as the Recovery Center and that aspect of life, we've now completely gone virtual. So everything that we were offering on the physical level is now virtual. And that includes groups and peer services on Zoom throughout each day of the week. We're also maintaining outreach with members, and we found that has been very impactful, that people are really excited to be able to hear from us, and it's almost surprising to them that someone is reaching out, and that we've maintained that relationship just through a different platform. Formal treatment is still being offered, of course, and that's through telemedicine and telehealth. And, one of the really cool experiences I was able to have last week was to do a Zoom meeting with some of the residential participants and clients, and also with the ACC detox unit. So I was able to connect with them through that platform. We've found barriers before with the Recovery Center, whether it be transportation or what have you, and now we're just finding that there's different barriers. The transportation might not be an issue, but now it's more of the technological part of it, and just learning the ropes of that, and maybe a little bit of intimidation with it, and just being flexible and going with the change. I wasn't thrilled with it at first, but I also found that, if I embrace it, others will too. So I still needed to kind of be that role model and that guide as we are just trudging this path. So that's really exciting for us. And, it's definitely different because we don't have the same traffic and the same flow coming through the Recovery Center as we did at one time. So that's different, but we're still keeping in touch with people, so it's great. As far as on a personal level, I immediately think of my daughter, and we kind of had an event last night where she had these these big crocodile tears, and she was saying, who brought this coronavirus here and why is it here? And she was just, I could hear and see the agony that was running through her as an 8-year-old. She's like, I just want to get out of the house. And, and my heart broke for her. And so that's been a struggle, of course. She hasn't been in school, so that's been different. She's been making her way. We're mindful of doing a little bit of her work each day, but at the same time, I understand that her emotional well-being and her emotional health is really what matters right now. So, if she's not into doing the math right now, we let that slide and we look at it at a later point, and I will sit next to her and try to be an active participant in her life, since her life has too drastically changed at this point. Of course, adjusting to changes at work and different policies and what have you. I try to put it in perspective. Brian, you speak about first responders and the work that you do. And, if I just have to adjust to doing some virtual meetings, I think I can handle that, as much as it might be a little bit of an inconvenience in my life. Just because change is change, and it's difficult and it's different. But like I said, I'm embracing that. For my own personal recovery, I'm utilizing the Zoom AA meetings, and I've actually found that I've really enjoyed that. I'm getting to meetings that are not even in my town that I normally wouldn't go to. I've been to Penn Yan meetings. I've been to out-of-state meetings. These are things that on a normal work night, I wouldn't even make the trek to go to that meeting, and I'm able to participate, and the message is still the same. And I just think that's the unity piece that is so important for my recovery. And I am meeting with my sponsor through the phone. We met last night, starting kind of some tradition work. And then I have a sponsee, and I meet with her weekly over the phone. Again, we just have to be flexible and willing to change with the changing conditions, and embracing the good pieces and the gifts that could actually come out of this, the opportunities. So, and I also agree with the routine aspect. I found it's so simple. I leave my house a half hour before I actually need to be at the recovery center. I drive down by the lake, I drive down the pier, and I take note that the water is different each time I go by. Like some mornings it's really still and silent, and the coloring of the landscape is a certain way, and then other mornings it's more choppy, but nonetheless it's beautiful. It's so beautiful, and it's so calming, and that's how I like to start my day. And then, for lunch, I get in the habit of actually leaving my work zone in my work area, and even if it's that I'm going to go just drive around the outskirts of town, I do that, and I physically remove myself from that atmosphere so that I can be ready to take on the rest of the day.
Yeah, I mean, that's huge, I think, is the routine change. You have to have some subtle changes to this thing. I mean, you can't just sit in the same space. You go stir crazy. No, I appreciate that. The lake is actually, we're blessed to have the lake that we do, for sure. Yeah, so, last episode, we were talking about no excuses as really being the idea that we had a plan going into this season, and there were certain things we had for our lives, and there really we were trying to encourage you not to have this be the reason that you would, in instance of substance abuse, relapse. And so what we're talking about today is really about, we still have to do something. We've got to get through this. And so today's subject is really a conversation about, what do you do? How do you get through seasons like this? And we've shared a few of the ideas, but my father actually on the way in here, I thought said something pretty interesting. And he says, when everything stops, we don't know what to do about it. And he didn't even realize what our subject was, but I thought it was interesting. My dad has observations about that. He's kind of one of these guys that no matter what happens around him, he's going to keep doing the same things he was doing anyway, which I have a lot of respect for. But this was interesting to me because that's his observation as somebody that will do something. He's not going to change his life anymore, and he has to because of this. And I'm not sure that works for everybody, but for him it does. So Brian, I don't know if you want to kick off the subject here. The show is really do something about it.
Yeah. So last week we spent the time, like you said, talking about, acknowledging the situation and not getting in that mindset of being kind of stuck because of what the circumstances have done to you. And I think of this image of someone getting on the wrong side of an escalator. So the escalator's coming down and they actually got on it thinking they're supposed to go up. And if they just walk at the same speed, the escalator is actually doing what it's supposed to, but they're not getting anywhere. And just to see the person in that same spot going over and over, and if they would just make an adjustment, they could ride it down and get on the other one. And then at the same time, if you're on that up escalator, you can just kind of get stuck in that rut of just going along at the speed that's not in your control, or you can accelerate and do something about it. And I think the idea of last week was don't regress. Don't let this be an excuse, and don't get stuck in those positions of kind of, I forget how Caitlin described it, but it's like this kind of selfless or selfish fear, this idea of just focusing on me and what's going to happen. What am I not going to get, and what am I potentially going to lose? And so we take you through this exercise of, well, then what? Or as Caitlin says, what if this happens, and what if that happens? And the idea is to make a plan, but this week is really do something about it. And as I see the conversation, it's really twofold. And when we had some of our preparation conversations, I heard it just come out over and over and over that it's this idea of do something. So there can potentially be the person that's struggling. They've lost a job, or maybe they've stumbled in their recovery, or maybe this, whether it's an economic issue or relationship issues, something has happened to them, and the alternative is to just stay there in misery and not do anything. And what we're encouraging you to do is go do something. And again, with your idea of journaling, Chris, I love that, because sometimes these still moments actually give us an opportunity to do some of that cataloging and taking the inventory and seeing where we've come from and seeing where it is we still want to go. I have an aunt that has been sending me responses to old emails, because what she's trying to do is clean out and start deleting old emails instead of keeping them in her inbox. And she just kind of closing the circle and saying, hey, I want to make sure I replied to this, and do you still need this, and whatever. And I think it's an opportunity for us to do that. She normally wouldn't take the time to do that, but because of this scenario, she's choosing to do something, productive with that time, rather than just sit around and, complain because you have to wear a mask to the grocery store, or you have to wait outside the grocery store, or, when is my check coming, and why can't I go see my friends? And you can sit around and just stew in that kind of, selfish fear and pain, or you can choose to do something. And then the other thing I want to talk about is this idea of doing something for others. And each of us kind of have different stories about where there have been real rewards and growth in our own life when we've chosen to reach out to someone else. And I use this example, and certainly it's not a brag on me of any means, but I tend to be a really big tipper when I go to restaurants. The reason is because I used to wait tables. And the one thing I do remember was when someone gave you like 20% or more, it just kind of made your day. Mm-hmm. And what that tells me is every single time I go eat somewhere, I have the opportunity to make their day. And it's amazing how good I feel when I'm already out to the parking lot. They haven't had a chance to come thank me for it. I don't even want that. I just know how good it made them feel. And now I kind of walk away glowing because I got to do something for someone else. And I think that's just kind of an image and an example of how we can choose to deliberately do it. And, I want us to go throughout the course of this conversation and talk about some practical examples of maybe how someone's reached out to us, or ways, kind of creative ways that, we can reach out to others. And Caitlin, I would push to you a little bit now that you're constrained on one hand because people can't be in person, but you've also talked about how good it is that it's opened some doors, because now people that, under certain restrictions could not go to meetings, or they're so far away, they've been at, just proximity hasn't allowed them to come to your specific meetings. But you go into out-of-state meetings, people in certain confinement aren't able to get there. What is something that you would kind of encourage people to do to make sure that they're plugging into that kind of online environment, and some of the benefits that that's created for connections? And then how have you seen it play out for people that are either in recovery or supporting people in recovery?
So I just talked to a woman yesterday. Actually, she had reached out to me, and she expressed what was going on in her life. And, I was able to relate with her, chat with her, dig into all of that. And then, the only solution other than my personal story and my personal experience, which is in fact, a spiritual experience. So it offers a lot of opportunity for others to learn from. The only thing I can offer tangibly right now are these virtual groups, the Zoom meetings, and phone communication. For whatever reason, I mean, and I understand it, but for whatever reason, that is, it's very intimidating, and I think it's almost the same idea as walking into a room or into a meeting for the first time. It's always going to be intimidating. And so trying to break that barrier and showing that, that I'm utilizing this new way of communicating, and so you can too. I've also offered that, if someone is interested in a specific group, that I will go to that group so at least they see a friendly face within the boxes of faces that they see there, So just trying to break down and eliminate any of those barriers. When you talk about the idea of self-forgetting in a way, Chris, it's interesting because it is two-sided. There's the self-care portion, which is so important that we're taking that time and that space, and that's why we talk about our routines, and we talk about the things that fill us back up, because we can't give something away if we don't have it, But at the same time, we also need to be self-forgetting, and I think that can be confusing to people in a sense. But it's more that idea of lack of control, right? And that I'm not going to plan the outcomes. I'm not going to plan and desires. That can be really dangerous territory, at least I know for me. So I really have to relinquish that control. So then when everything around me seems so out of control and like a lot is being taken away from me in a sense or subtracted, I immediately go into fear mode and that gripping tight, that control, and I don't even know what I think I have control of, because in the end, what I have been shown through this entire experience is that I really don't have much control at all. And that's been freeing for me to see that, to really experience that, not just to be told it, not, the serenity prayer is great, but those are words. I have been experiencing this lack of control through COVID-19, and I'm grateful for that. I've been experiencing grace, and I've also been experiencing the real beautiful, genuine kindness of others. I celebrated my birthday last week, and I even in my head, I said, you know what, Caitlin, don't have high expectations, not much is going to be coming your way, and I kind of gave myself a pep talk, and I received not in material things, because really, frankly, the material things, they come and go, but I received so much more than I bargained for, and that has also been the truth in sobriety. That has been the truth in my life all along, that when I let go, and when I just let life flow and let people be, that I receive so much more than I ever bargained for. So this time for me is a lot of receiving, a lot of resilience. It's another example of resilience, and that we will all get through this united and together.
I just want to say something. I want to say something too on that, Caitlin, because it's funny. You actually described the perfect scenario for this. So if you remember, I referenced one time the book "Who Moved My Cheese." If you haven't watched the YouTube cartoon that illustrates that book, you have to watch it, because it really it's such a great picture of, again, it's two mice that go through the maze every day, and they end up in the same spot, and they get a big pile of cheese, and they're fat and happy, and they go on. One day they go and they get to the same spot, and the cheese isn't there. And the idea is, who moved my cheese, right? And almost immediately, one of them just starts going throughout the rest of the maze, trying to figure out where the cheese is. While one of them just kind of sits there indignant, like, who moved my cheese? And at some point, the cheese is going to come back here, and I'm going to wait here for it, and they don't do anything. And so as I see where some of the programs at Connections have changed because you can't be in the same room together as a group, some people have the option, it's a legitimate option, to sit and bemoan the fact that we can't get together. And it's really important to me to get together, and they can just sit there and pound their fists on the table about what they don't have, or they can go to the next option, and it's a valid option, and try this whole internet thing. Try doing something new, because remember, you can try something new and it's going to be uncomfortable, much like this virus is, much like a lot of changes in our lives are going to be uncomfortable. But the other option is to stay in your misery. And that just makes no sense. And I do it. I mean, we all do it in different ways, but I think that was part of last week, is acknowledge that sitting there and getting all of the hyperbole and the political just banter back and forth, that's really not what's impacting you. Figure out what's impacting you, and then figure out, what am I going to do about it?
Yeah, and you talk about taking responsibility for where your life is at right now. Whatever circumstances or conditions are going on around us, this is still our life that we have responsibility for. And Chris, you actually really helped me understand something last week, and it was very simple that, I had this shift in perspective, and I can explain why and how this shift in perspective came about. But Chris, you said, from day to day, nothing in your life has essentially changed, Caitlin, but my demeanor and the way I was carrying myself completely changed because the shift in my mind had changed. And my ability to let go, to, again, relinquish that control. I keep saying it. And at the end of the day, to forget about self and my selfishness and my self-seeking and attention-seeking and anything that is going to try to fill Caitlin up, because at the end of the day, I'm never going to be fulfilled. So I'm just going to keep chasing and chasing and chasing. And the best way for me to get out of that is to help others. And it sounds so simple, and again, I bring it back to last week with my birthday. I had people come to my work with signs outside of the window saying happy birthday. I had flowers from Stella's delivered to me. These are simple things but I knew people went out of their way to do these things, and they didn't have to. And it was and along the lines of what you're saying, Brian, with tipping, it completely transformed my day. It caused a ripple effect. And then from there, I saw myself doing my job and leading my life in a different way, as a complete reflection of their behavior and kindness toward me.
I feel like you probably get a lot more positive stuff than Brian ever got tips. So I'm not sure he can relate in that way, but that's why he realized.
Same thing.
I was thinking, as you were talking, though, one of the reasons why I think you rebound better than most, and one of the reasons I've learned to rebound, I think, where we get sideways generally is we don't look at reality. We spend a good portion of our mind and functioning based on the fear of what might come. I hear you talking about that, but I think the other thing where you're helping people so much is your relatability. You're willing to say, I'm feeling this too. And that's one thing I've experienced this week as well. I don't have a lot of advice to give people that's really any value because I'm going through it with you. I think a lot of times just when you do go through it, you're acknowledging you're going through it, and you just rely wholly on the principles that got you through other bad seasons. They say that the trials give you patience, they give you the experience and it gives you patience. I feel like my trials of the past, those tools that I've learned that helped me get to this day are the same tools I'll use today to get to my next day. And some of that is relying on some very good friends and my social network that's tight with me and people that I can go to and say, I'm feeling this sort of way. Caitlin, you referred to that conversation. The reason that conversation happens is because I know how you move when things aren't going so good. And I can give you the respect of dealing with that because I also have so much faith in you and how you deal with things. I know you'll get back to a good place. And sometimes you just got to get off your chest. That the importance of valuable friendships is they kind of know that as well. We got to rely on people outside of us. We all want to be strong people. We really do. Like in our heart, we want to be seen as strong, stable, the one, that's our selfish motivation. But in the end, we're all human beings, and we do have moments where we just don't feel that way. And it's okay to be that vulnerable, but it's also good to have somebody behind you who can say you got your back. And Brian, I talked to you, about the anger thing. Brian and I relate on one thing. We relate on Cubs, our sick sense of humor, and being angry people when we shouldn't be angry about things. And right. God's a big part of made sure the rest of that stuff all neutralized itself. But I was telling Brian this week, just in a sense of vulnerability for the audience, anger was really starting to consume me in certain portions of my life. And I know giving that fire, I had to do something about that. And so when we were talking about things that we do in this stage, there's some positive things we're going to do. We're seeing drinking go through the roof. In Alcohol Awareness Month, we're seeing alcohol go up. That's something people are doing. I could have let anger rise and not do something about that. Instead, I chose to do something about that spiritual component as well. So it's not just an activity. It's about recognizing what are the spiritual barriers that are going on in your life. This is definitely a good time without the noise there. Deal with those things as well.
Well, and one of the things we've spoken about in the past is kind of this recalibration. So I use a diet as an example a lot. So I know in my mind that if I diet and exercise, I'm going to lose weight. or I'm going to get in shape or whatever. And I have, in the beginning, when I'm going to set off to do it, my heart is aligned with that because I really want the results. And then my hands are actually out doing it, at least for a period of time. But then something causes us to get out of alignment. Usually my being lazy and getting really hungry. Those are the things that will pull me out of alignment in that scenario. But it can be lots of different things. It can be your spirituality. It can be the faithfulness in a marriage. It can be, being good to your children, being, good children to your parents. Lots of different relationships and activities in our lives. We have this head, heart, hands alignment, and it gets out of whack sometimes. And so we talk about recalibrating, and when things are going well, every 24 hours is kind of a good gauge for how often you should kind of just lock in and make sure that you're kind of aligned still. Sometimes it has to be more often than that, especially when we start to have fear and doubt and, pain in our lives. That's when our heart gets pulled to the side, and then our behaviors usually follow our heart instead of what we know to be true. But one of the things I want to suggest this week is kind of a practical step for people in go do something about it is in learning to appreciate people, we created this idea called reflection time. And it's just with one other person. You could do it if you have a circle of friends, and you can do Zoom meetings or something, or you could just get on the phone with a buddy or a family member that you're going to have some mutual trust for. And the idea is that sometimes I need to kind of just walk through a recalibration exercise out loud, and just, I blew it yesterday with my temper or on my diet, or stumbled in sobriety, whatever your issue is, for you to be able to kind of walk through that. So it's kind of like you're holding a mirror up and you're looking in your reflection to gauge your alignment and then recalibrate if necessary. But the important part of doing it with someone else is sometimes you need them to hold up the mirror because you've gotten stuck in a rut, or you've gotten to the point of denial. And sometimes you need someone else to hold up that mirror to help you reflect. And what that can mean is just reminding someone of a time in their life, maybe when they didn't feel like this, or, you listen to the person's pain and what's going on in their life, but then, you kind of help them, put those things into the proper brackets and figure out what's really bothering you and what are you going to do about it. And what you're doing about it right now, or maybe what that pain has caused you to do, that doesn't seem like that's consistent with the things that you really stand for. And so sometimes it's me holding up the mirror and just doing it out loud. And, maybe I'm giving Caitlin or Chris the opportunity to just make sure that as I'm recalibrating that, I'm doing it in a way that's consistent. And sometimes I'm just not having it, and I need someone to shoot me a message or pick up the phone and call me and say, hey, you doing okay? I've seen this one thing that's kind of inconsistent, and I just want to make sure that, you're doing all right. And then be able to walk through a scenario where, I might need them to press in a little bit and say, have you considered this, or why are you allowing this to happen? Because that's what I want. I want to be aligned. At the end of the day, I want that 24-hour cycle to be consistent, because that'll keep me on the path that I've chosen to be on, versus allowing these circumstances and these emotions to pull me out of alignment.
You just said something that whole conversation you just had really impressed something on me. I think the reason that one of the observations that I've had through all of this is that people, a good portion of our population, to deal with this chaos is to create more chaos. So they're aligning themselves either with a political argument, a rise up argument, or whatever else, and they're coming to those places of chaos to deal with the situation. What you just described was actually just a conversation. So what I'm finding is that one of the values that I've found through this whole thing is sometimes just talking through whatever it is. Find that one person, find individuals that you can just have a conversation with. It's not anything that you're maybe not come to some great epiphany, but sometimes it's just to have a valuable, thoughtful conversation to get through something that maybe just reprocesses tools that you already know. The thing that Caitlin just described here is not some brand new tool. And the thing that I respect about what you're saying is it's not fake it till you make it. I hear that statement a lot. And I know that we say that early on in recovery, but what you're actually doing is you're being authentic. You're actually, even though you don't feel good, you're practicing the tools that that are going to make you stay good.
Well, it's our emotions that usually pull us away. So sometimes the exercise is just us calling our emotions back.
Yes.
It's calling them back to where we're centered and what we really believe to be true so that we can feel it again, so that acting on it's much more natural.
Well, yeah, and it's really helpful obviously to know what your tendencies are. Like I know for me my tendencies are to do the fight or flight type deal. I'm either going to stay here and hold rigid to my beliefs and how I want this to work for me, or I'm just gonna run. And I've done that my whole life. And the running aspect I've done my whole life. I also will when I'm in this negative mindset will go to the black and white thinking, all or nothing. It's either this or it's that. And in a time like this right now, especially with the coronavirus and life in general, really there is no black and white. It's all gray, and so being able to see that and to know that. And when I'm in that mode where I'm going to the always never type talk. And then also I have a tendency I will attack myself before I will attack you. And I will completely beat myself down that I'm not capable. I no longer am qualified to do my job. Just all of a sudden,
Right.
I can't do it. I'm no good. And I'm just letting all of these outside factors, all of this fear, all of this pain, completely just engulf me. But like I said, knowing those tendencies, I can see, and I was doing it last week, I can see when I'm behaving that way, when I'm starting to travel down that road. Now, what am I going, like Brian said, what am I going to do about it when I can see that my behavior has shifted? And for me, that's where I need that mirror. I need someone else to point some things out to me so that just that fog can shift or lift for a little bit. And I certainly had a God moment last week because right when I was in the midst of this stinking thinking, I got a phone call from someone, and my first reaction was going to be, I'm not well, I'm not doing good, let's chat later. But from experience, I know that's exactly the time when I need to speak with someone. I'm going to need to be vulnerable. I'm going to need to be uncomfortable. And generally, the uncomfortable is where I grow and where that spirituality can actually be practiced. So I stayed on the phone. It ended up being the best 40 minutes I have spent in a long time on the phone with someone. And she didn't have to do a heck of a lot, but she just needed to be present with me. She just needed to listen to me, to genuinely care. And she was able to point out a few things to me. She said, well, as of right now, Caitlin, this whole fight or flight thing, that's just not going to work out, right? So how are we going to find a way to make you be able to tolerate the situation that you are in right now? She also allowed me to feel exactly how I was feeling, and I cried. I cried on the phone to her, and she said, you just need to let it out. And she let me do that without judgment. Once I got through those tears and kind of like the shaking type tears, that too was a big resolve. And she, I said, I'm always like this. I'm always in fear. And she pointed out, well, Caitlin, I've seen you numerous times where you're not like this. You're not in fear. And I paused and I said, oh, okay.
That's powerful.
So I needed to have someone that I trusted and that was a genuinely good human on the other end of the phone. And there again, she was on the other end of the phone. She was not in front of me as it normally would be, but it still worked. And I really want to impress that upon people, that the phone situation, and this friend, explained this to me as well. Situations right now are not ideal. They just simply are not. She said every human being in America and around the world they're not functioning at their best. Manufacturers, agencies, no one is functioning at their ideal best right now. And so then that kind of put things into a better perspective for me as well, that it's just not all about Caitlin and how I can be perfect and be the best peer and save everyone from their addiction. She just really brought me back to the ground and right-sized. And so that was my experience with exactly what you're talking about last week. And it was,
and I think you talk about, sorry, Chris, but Caitlin, you talk a lot about perspective. And I think it is sometimes, having someone help you with perspective. Sometimes it could be as simple as, is it really that bad, if they're a close enough friend and you can do that? But I think it's also this idea of, go back to the diet. Am I doing this to be comfortable, or am I doing this to lose weight? Why am I doing this? And so, in the COVID scenario, am I sitting in my home to feel good, or am I sitting here to avoid getting sick? You have to look at the purpose and the real value in why you've chosen to do something. It can be a job, it can be a diet, it can be sobriety for sure. Are you choosing to the road of recovery because you want to feel good, or are you choosing the road of recovery because you want to be sober and you want the benefits that come from that, you know? And I think sometimes when we get a different perspective, it's, I don't feel good right now. And, you know, I think all of us to some degree, but certainly people that are really struggling find themselves ruminating on discomfort. And I just don't want to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, there was two parts, Caitlin, that you said that really struck me too. Is one is it's from both sides of it. Your support system on that really didn't do anything magical except they were accessible. I mean, that's right now when we're trying to think about how to help other people, sometimes it's just being accessible and it just being available for those conversations. But the second thing plays into more about this idea of exploring options. This is one of the areas that you and I relate very, very much alike, is that when our head gets sideways, everything sucks. Like we suck at everything. Like nothing we've ever done has been good, and everything we're ever going to touch is going to blow up. It's not real, but in our head, we make it very real, and it becomes our entire world in that moment. And I relate so much to that when you're speaking about it. But at the same time, we've gone through enough that we've learned that there always are other options. And when we're with trusted people, like you say, you've used this term a lot, perspective shifts. It only takes a little nudge to get us to go, oh yeah, there is another option here. And we talked about, as we were prepping for this show, I wrote it down and there was some statements that we made. There's a difference between saying to somebody, I feel this way, versus I'm going through something. I'm going through something doesn't really make you accessible to somebody that is accessible. So my point is this: if I'm willing to help you, and I've made myself accessible to you, and I'm trying to help you, and you just say, I'm just going through something. You're not really investing back in this conversation. However, if you tell me I'm feeling this way, I'm feeling angry, I'm hurt, I'm fearful, all those things, now we can start quarantining in, because the only experience I have is that, yeah, I felt bad too in the first scenario. Or the second one, you could say, if you're telling me that you're fearful, I can say, I get it. In some areas, I'm fearful now. These are some things I'm doing to deal with that portion of my feelings. And I feel like that we have responsibilities on both sides of this as we go through this. And Caitlin, when you talk about that perspective shift, I couldn't agree more, because it doesn't take some big, new program or book or anything else. Sometimes it just takes Brian saying, well, yeah, I get like that too. And I'm like, oh yeah, you know what? And then just that conversation makes me joke a little bit. And I'm like, everything doesn't suck. I might be able to do something right.
Well, yeah.
And I think there could be some encouragement in this, that you don't have to have these deep-rooted, powerful relationships to start to benefit from this, right? We talk about this trajectory of our lives. We want to be upward, and you're not going to be at the mountaintop, and you might not have 6 people that are going to call you when you're down and really be able to dig into your soul and figure everything out. Start with something small. And as we talk about how good it feels to invest in someone else's life, another recommendation I want to make today is this idea of just take this for a test drive. Take the last 10 people that sent you a text, or go to like the first 10 contacts in your contact list. Pick 10 people and just send them a text. How are you doing today? Because it feels good when someone does that for us. And maybe we're having a good day and we're like, oh, we're doing good. That's great. But sometimes we're down, and it's just like, when you go to the mailbox, you're kind of just hoping to see something in there. And it's when someone reaches out and says, how are you doing? It feels so good. So take that initial first step, and it doesn't have to be this dramatic, super involved conversation. Just reach out to other people and take that simple step and just see where it goes.
That's a good idea. What were you going to say? Oh, I thought you were.
No, I was just going to say before Brian started speaking there, which I wholeheartedly agree with everything that you just said. But this idea, Chris, that I'm so unique, so that relatability factor when you're talking with someone else, especially if it's someone that you respect or admire, that can cause the perspective shift as well.
Yeah.
Because I definitely think that I'm just this unique human being with these unique feelings and almost alienated. So if you're already feeling isolated, that can be a pretty tough space to be in.
Yeah, I feel like even in our conversations, one of the things that I connect a lot with you on is that I feel like every ingredient that got me to who I am today, I'm the only one. Mm-hmm. Forget the fact that nobody else. That's it. That's me.
Yeah.
And nobody else understands because I'm the only one. But in fact, just because the event might have been slightly unique and maybe my insanity made it a little more creative, it's still, the bucket was still the same bucket. Your experiences, while they're different in narrative, are the exact same things. They were driven on fear, uncertainties, anger, hurt. All these things are the same buckets. And then when we come out of it, it's insecurities, anxieties, regret, guilt, anger. It's all this stuff is still there. And in the end, we all get better the same way. Rigorous honesty, support of others, something beyond us. And for me, it's God. These things that we have to address these components. How many times have you heard somebody say they're spiritually bankrupt? Or they're whole and they're God-sized whole or whatever it is. It doesn't matter whatever your belief system is. There's two pieces to us. There's the practical action that we're talking about today, what you're actually doing about it. But some of those actions are related to what are you doing with that spiritual peace? How are you resting on these things that are out of our control? So much of this is not in our control. No matter what we say to get through it, so much is out of our control, but there's still plenty that is. And I've found that any leadership book you read, anybody that I've seen be successful in getting through hard times, any of the number of people I have respect, like the two people in this session that we're with, we've all been through difficult things. And it all started with sometimes the things we can do to get through are just small things. Back to 24 hours again. Maybe it's just 2 hours. Maybe it's just managing this one rage moment you have. We're going to put a toaster through a window because somebody said something to you on Facebook. It's...
That was awful specific, Chris.
I got to get a new window.
You've thought that one before.
No, that was in the bathtub. Just kidding. I need a new toaster and I might need a new window, but just saying. Yeah, it was a little too specific. All right. Sorry, guys. Our next guest is Chief Hedworth from the Canandaigua City Police. So, but I do think I like the idea of taking practical steps forward. To me, it's accessibility. While I think that social media is probably one of the biggest detractors to stability these days, there are some benefits for it too. There's those private messages you get from people that are really struggling and they don't feel safe. I do think it's encouraging people to access your options. I mean, for me, it's difficult for me to understand how it would be nerve-wracking or in any way uncomfortable to get on a Zoom meeting. But it actually is for a lot of people.
Well, and you can turn the video off too.
Yeah.
I mean, there's options there too. You could have audio off, you could mute it, you could have video off, you could put your name as Joe Smith. I mean, there's options if you're not comfortable with that capacity too.
What other things are you seeing where people are getting nervous? Maybe we can help them through some of are there other areas where you're seeing people that are not willing to explore options?
I think the idea of stepping into a community of recovering alcoholics or addicts, just stepping into that and not knowing anyone, that unto itself is very intimidating and scary. And not knowing, what are they going to say to you? What are the lessons that are going to be provided here? Mm-hmm. And especially if you are in active drinking or active use, it's just that alone is terrifying. And I can respect that. But then when you start to say, okay, well, here is the link for you to register. And then once you register, you're going to get an email. And then that email has an ID and a password. And, I think that's where people go, well, okay. And they throw their hands up. This is too much for me.
Right.
I don't follow without giving it really much of a chance. And I'm saying that because I did that.
Yeah, no doubt.
And I said, I don't follow this.
I am not shocked you did that.
My phone's not really good enough for the, I can't do this. And I did. So I did that very thing. And I say to Brian, I threw a tantrum. And my type of a tantrum where I say I throw my hands up. But if you give it a chance and you just kind of punch in some codes, it's not that hard. It's not that difficult. And like I said, you don't have to even have your screen on if that's what you're more comfortable with.
And Caitlin, isn't this kind of a unique time right now where, people that aren't even in recovery, and we've talked about this before, where people on the peripheral, spouses and, parents and people, isn't this an opportunity that's kind of unique with the virtual side of things, with connections and some of the different organizations that you work with, because people could potentially just log in and listen. And that might be kind of a whole way to kind of peek behind the curtain and understand, listen to some people in recovery and the things that they're struggling with, and potentially listen to other people that are not in recovery, that are supporters or family members or whatever. And just to become part of that dialogue, I think it can be empowering and equipping, but isn't right now kind of the time to do that for people? Because that's not normally the case.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely, it's a phenomenal opportunity that we have right now, that the community at large has the ability to access these meetings. Now, I mean, we've had issues, of course, with that being the case, but there are ways to put like safeguards and precautions so that there's not any of that funny business. Because we had an AA meeting where some people got on there and they unmuted themselves. They didn't have their screen on, and they said some really inappropriate things. So they were there for the motive of just interrupting and being inappropriate. That doesn't happen often, but we're learning through this process. But for the intention and the motive of wanting to be a part of and wanting to learn and maybe some empathy, this is an amazing time. And it's not just Connections Rounded Recovery. I mean, there are virtual meetings popping up all over the place in terms of treatment facilities, in terms of other recovery centers, peer learning collaboratives where just peers are all getting together and learning from one another. And I just did a Zoom meeting with family members in Pennsylvania, so that we can get creative with this and be able to check in on one another.
Yeah, I love that.
That's
I think that around options, and we always harp on options and considering other options. There is a vast difference when somebody presents to you a new option, and I hear I do get aggravated in helping people when they say, "I'm trying." That I usually, to me, I hear it and I can smell the alcohol. I'm trying. That's an emotional response. But if somebody's saying, "Here's an option for you," say, "I'll try it."
Yeah.
It's not that much different, but it's wholly different in your attitude, because I don't think that we're in a place right now that has a unique set of challenges that's forcing us in a very uncomfortable place, that we can possibly look past other options. I know that I'm looking at different options, and trying to force myself to different things. It's not because I'm perfect or doing anything wonderful. I'm noticing the value in trying different things. It makes a difference in my life anyway, and I think it will in others as well.
Well, again, I always come back to this mantra, and I think it's so perfect this week that we talk about investing in others. And, I'll use the tipping example again. I remember how it feels on the day that you get a big tip and you get excited, and it's, obviously it puts money in your pocket, but there's a little intangible reward there that, just kind of feels good. So in turn, I have the opportunity then to do that to other people. So it is the golden rule of do to others as you would have them do to you. And it sometimes, and it's really hard, I think, for people to understand this until they actually go and do it. But sometimes when you're down, the best thing you can do selfishly for yourself is to pick up your phone and reach out to someone else in an effort to help them. It's simple as checking in on someone. And sometimes when you reach out and just, "Hey, how's your day going?" and ask about someone else's story, a lot of the times that'll turn back around to them asking about how your day's going and about your story. And that can be, a super opportunity to then heal together with someone or find that right person when it feels comfortable to kind of share what's going on with you. Just don't stay stuck where you're at in that place of pain or fear. Do something about it.
Agreed. Well, we do appreciate you guys taking the time to tune in with us today. We didn't want to make the show another COVID. I mean, we've seen everything about COVID-19. Every headline's got something in it. What we're talking about today are tools that we want, and hopefully have impressed you on, is that we're using days gone by. And we're saying that they've worked for our lives, and we're seeing them work again in this stage, and they'll work again in the next stage that we go through. The show is about living life in tough times. And in those tough times, sometimes you just have to do something. And, we believe wholeheartedly that, we don't have all the answers, but we're invested, and we do appreciate those that reach out. And you're probably going to get the same advice if you saw us in the street that you'll see here on the show. It's not just a show for us. It's how we're trying to live life. So, Brian, I think we'll bring it home here. So I don't know if you want to close out.
Yeah, just thanks everybody for jumping in with this. I think between just the three of us, sometimes we're connecting to get ready for a show or some of the other business interests that we're pursuing, but it has become so clear in this tagline of changed lives, change lives, and everybody has the opportunity to participate in that. So I would say maybe right before we go, if Caitlin could just throw out some of the resources that are there for people, because you do have options. And even if it's picking up the phone and calling Caitlin or someone at the center to say, how can I get plugged in? I'm a little uncomfortable. I'm a little, unsure about this. Let them walk you in virtually and kind of introduce you and help you understand what to expect, so that when you arrive in a chat room or on the phone with someone, you're a little bit more confident and comfortable. But please take that step.
As far as connections rounded recovery, and what Brian was just saying, I would say to just reach out. Anyone is more than welcome to reach out to me on a personal level. And like he said, I would be happy to walk with you through the steps of getting access to virtual meetings. Like I said, too, it's not just the Recovery Center that is doing this. There's multiple facets and mental health components. I know that the mental health unit, Ontario County Mental Health, is doing things. Rochester Regional is doing virtual groups, Recovery Fitness. There's all kinds of things. So, please reach out to me and I can definitely get you connected with the resource that would be a best fit for you. And again, to remain willing. That's been the necessary component and ingredient in my recovery since day one, is to have that willingness. Even if I might not like it, I have the willingness to seek and to try something different if need be. And thank you for tuning in.
We appreciate you guys checking us out again. There are options out there. In fact, the options that are available now are more accessible than they've ever been. You don't even have to leave your house. So make sure that you're looking for what's available to you. And also, if you see Brian and he's waiting on one of your tables, make sure you give him a tip. He's been begging for it in this show. So but we do believe that change lives, and we'd ask that you check out our website at 100proofliving.com. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the 100 Proof Living podcast. Please remember to rate and review this show wherever you get podcasts. It really helps. Get more information at 100proofliving.com.